Mia Barrett set the carpet bag on the narrow bed in the upper governor's chamber at Hawthorne Court and did not sit down, because sitting would have felt like weakness, and she had spent the last hour proving she still possessed the right to stand where she chose. The room smelled faintly of starch and old lavender, with a low ceiling that sloped so sharply near the window she had to incline her head to look out across the stable yard. It was a servant's room in all but name, though the housekeeper had called it respectable and the contract had called it adequate. One trunk was permitted, one coal scuttle per evening, meals in the schoolroom unless summoned elsewhere. 2 years of instruction to Master Leo Hawthorne in pianoforte, composition exercises, and deportment at the keyboard for future public appearance. She touched the folded contract in her reticule and felt the seal ridge against her fingertips, like a bruise. She unpacked with the care of someone inventorying a life. 2 plain wool dresses, 1 black silk suitable for Sunday, her metronome wrapped in handkerchief linen, 6 stitched music books, needle case, mending thread, 1 pair of gloves already thinning at the fingers, and her father's old tuning fork. At the bottom of the bag lay a letter edged in cream, still unopened because she knew the hand and could hear the voice without reading a word. Lydia Barrett wrote in stiff, exact lines that looked like iron railings. Mia broke the wax anyway. The first sentence delivered exactly what she had expected. "You will marry Lord Penhurst in June. Your preferences are decorative." There was no salutation. There was no signature at the end, only the instruction that half her wages would be collected monthly by Mr. Cobb, steward to Mrs. Barrett, against advances already made upon your account. Mia folded the page once, then twice, and slid it beneath the metronome. She did not tear it. Paper was not the enemy. Downstairs the house bell struck 10, thin and metallic. A maid knocked, bobbed a curtsy, and informed Miss Barrett that Master Leo's first lesson would begin immediately in the East Music Room. Mia carried her own stool and score folder because no one had offered help, and she would not ask for it. The corridor to the schoolroom level narrowed as it ran, the wallpaper fading from gilt leaves to plain green sprigs, wealth thinning by degree as though comfort itself understood rank. Somewhere below, silver clinked in the breakfast parlour. Somewhere farther off, a groom laughed, then stopped as a butler passed. The East Music Room was long and cool, with high windows that admitted a pale square of autumn light to the floorboards, and a Broadwood pianoforte that had been tuned recently, but not loved. Dust lay in the carved corners. A boy sat on the bench with his feet not quite touching the carpet, hands arranged carefully in his lap, as if he had been positioned and left there. He looked perhaps 9. His hair fell too neatly for a child who played outdoors, and his eyes were grey, watchful, old in a way that made her chest tighten. "Good morning, Master Leo," she said. "I am Miss Barrett." He inclined his head without speaking. A nurse stood near the door with the rigid composure of household staff who had survived a difficult nursery. "He speaks when needed, miss. He does not like to be corrected in front of others." "There are no others," Mia said, and moved the extra chair into the corner herself. "Thank you. I shall ring if assistance is required." The nurse hesitated, assessed Mia's dress, perhaps her accent, and left with visible relief. Mia set the metronome on the piano, opened to scales in C major, and waited. Leo waited with her. She had taught children who fidgeted, children who boasted, children who cried at the first failed trill. She had never taught one who withdrew so completely that even silence seemed occupied. "We shall begin with 5-finger exercise," she said gently. "No audience, no haste." His hands came to the keys with mechanical obedience and excellent form, then halted one note in, as if an internal command had been contradicted by the room itself. His throat moved. His fingers trembled once and grew still. Mia lowered the lid halfway, not enough to end the lesson, but enough to remove the demand. "Do you know how to count the stable clocks from this window?" He looked at her, startled by the question. "There are 3, she continued. "The kitchen clock, the yard clock, and the chapel clock. They never agree with one another, which is an offense to time but a gift to musicians." Something almost like curiosity crossed his face. "Listen," she said. From beyond the glass came the staggered hour. One bell, then another delayed, then a third with a deeper tone. Leo's shoulders dropped by a fraction. "Now," Mia said, "you and I shall make a 4th clock." He played 1 note, then 2. Not performance, response. She matched his pace with a soft-spoken count, and by the end of the half-hour he had completed a scale without looking at his hands. When the nurse returned, he had returned to stillness, but the stillness was different. Not fear, guarded concentration. Mia wrote the lesson report in a clean school hand. Progress, minimal but genuine. Avoid forcing tempo. Build confidence through rhythmic grounding. She signed and sanded the ink. At the bottom, she added the practical note every employer valued more than pedagogy. No damage to instrument. By the first week of October, her days had settled into the shape of a harness. Dawn practice with Leo before breakfast. Theory exercises in the small schoolroom while the household rode out. Noon meal alone unless guests required entertainment. Afternoon repetition. Evening accounts by candlelight. Every expenditure entered on lined paper. 1/2 pound of candles, 1 packet of pen nibs, ribbon replacement for metronome pendulum, mending wool. At month's end, she sealed half her wages in an envelope addressed to Mr. Cobb and placed it in the outgoing dispatch pouch with a steadiness she did not always feel. Hawthorne Court expected quiet competence from those it paid, and Mia delivered it. Yet the old control reached her there as surely as if Lydia stood in the doorway. Letters arrived twice weekly, never affectionate, always exact. Payment is due, obedience is expected. Lord Penhurst has been informed of your improved prospects. Do not embarrass us. She read each one once, then stacked them beneath the same silver paperweight in the writing desk. She answered only when silence would have cost her legal standing. Her replies were brief, formal, and impossible to misread. "I acknowledge receipt. The remittance has been sent. I will not discuss marriage by post." No one in the house asked why she pressed so hard on the nib when she wrote those final lines. On Thursdays, she was required to sit in the smaller drawing room when neighbouring ladies called, because the child's instructress must be visible if she is to be judged suitable. They discussed her in a register they perhaps believed too elevated for insult. "That is Miss Barrett," Lady Cresswell said once, stirring tea with a spoon that clicked against porcelain. "The Barrett girl who refused her only proper offer." "Did she refuse?" another lady asked, eyebrows lifting with elegant disbelief. "Or was she dismissed and the story improved?" Mia kept her gaze on the embroidery she had not threaded and spoke only when directly addressed. "Miss Barrett, is it true you are from trade?" "My father's investments included shipping, madam." "How progressive!" The word landed like dust, dry and condescending. Mia inclined her head and did not defend herself. Her right hand had tightened around the hoop so hard the knuckles blanched. She released it before anyone noticed. That evening she brought a cup of broth to the old groundsman when she found him coughing near the glass-house door, one hand braced against the brick. He looked startled to be spoken to by name. She set the cup on the ledge, adjusted the scarf at his throat, and returned to the schoolroom before the household clock struck 8. No declaration accompanied the act. She had been raised among people who considered kindness a negotiation. She preferred it clean. When November deepened and the hedges blackened with damp, Mr. Cobb arrived in person to collect the remittance. He requested the steward's office, though no business required privacy. Mia entered, placed the envelope on the blotter, and remained standing while he counted the notes. "Mrs. Barrett is patient beyond reason," he said, not looking up. "Most young ladies in your position would show gratitude." "I have paid what was demanded." "Lord Penhurst is a practical man, Miss Barrett. You would do well to be practical also." She watched him fold the money and tuck it into his ledger case as if he were pocketing fabric swatches. "Practicality is not the same as surrender, Mr. Cobb." He gave a thin smile. "For women, it often is." Mia turned toward the door. "Mrs. Barrett expects your presence in town for Christmas negotiations," he added. "Date to be confirmed." Mia paused with her hand on the latch. The corridor beyond smelled of beeswax and coal smoke. Somewhere downstairs, Leo was repeating the left-hand pattern she had assigned, each note tentative and true. "Expectation is not agreement," she said. 4 words would have served. She gave him 6 and left. Later that night, in her small room under the eaves, she opened her contract and reread the clauses by candle flame until the edges blurred. 2 years guaranteed board and stipend provided conduct remained orderly and instruction effective by household standards. Dismissal permitted upon household restructuring, financial exigency, or reputational concern. The law had many elegant phrases for precarity. She knew them all now. She took out fresh paper and wrote to Lydia anyway, because the silence between command and response had become another form of capture. "Mrs. Barrett, I remain under contract at Hawthorne Court through Michaelmas of the 2nd year. I will remit the stipulated share monthly. I decline all discussion of Lord Penhurst. Miss Mia Barrett." She sanded the page, folded it, and sealed it with plain wax. Her hand did not shake until after the seal cooled. In the music room the next morning, Leo missed the opening arpeggio and closed his hands at once, waiting for rebuke. Mia moved the metronome 1 inch nearer and set it ticking. "Again, Master Leo," she said. He looked at her, uncertain. "Again," she repeated, quieter. He began once more, and this time he reached the end of the line. Mia let the final note settle into the wood of the instrument and the walls beyond it, then closed the score without applause. Leo watched her hands as if the judgment might be written in the angle of her fingers. "You completed it," she said. "That is the work." His shoulders eased, a movement so slight another person might have missed it. He slid from the bench when the lesson bell sounded and paused at the door, one hand on the brass plate. "Tomorrow," he said, scarcely above breath. "Tomorrow at dawn," she replied. After he left, she wiped the keys with a soft cloth, reset the metronome spring, and carried her stool back to the schoolroom herself. The tray left for her breakfast held weak tea, bread gone cool, and 1 pear with a bruise on one side. She cut around the bruise and ate, standing at the desk where the household ledgers for instructional expenses were kept, entering her own account beneath the steward's headings in a smaller hand. Lamp oil, copied exercises, replacement strings for practice board. The column for requested items remained empty. Requesting items invited questions, and questions invited surveillance, and surveillance was a language she already spoke too well. The harness of her days tightened by increments no one announced. Leo met her in the music room before the fires in the grand rooms were fully lit, pale from sleep and buttoned into a coat too stiff for comfort. They worked scales first, then phrasing, then silent finger patterns on the edge of the bench when his breathing shortened. At breakfast hour she left him with his French tutor and returned to the schoolroom, where ink froze in the nib if she sat too close to the window. By noon, she heard the carriage wheels of callers on the gravel and knew whether she would be summoned to display utility by the rhythm of feet in the corridor. In the afternoon, she drilled intervals while footmen moved furniture in rooms she did not enter. At night, she mended cuffs by firelight until the coal in her scuttle fell in on itself, and the room turned sharply cold. 3 days later, a letter from Lydia arrived with the household post, and a faint perfume that clung to the paper like accusation. Mia opened it at her desk, while Leo copied note values in careful black stems. You continue to mistake employment for independence. Lord Penhurst remains willing to overlook your theatrics. She folded the letter once, placed it beneath the silver paperweight, and moved Leo's copybook 1 inch to the left, so his hand could rest more easily. Your wrist is too rigid, she told him. The line must breathe. He glanced at her face, measuring weather. Finding none, he bent again to the page. On Thursday, she was sent for at 4 o'clock precisely and directed to the smaller drawing room, where Lady Cresswell and 2 visitors from Bath consumed cakes as if they were evaluating inventory. The room smelled of bergamot and polished mahogany, and every chair had been arranged to produce angles from which one might be observed without acknowledging observation. Miss Barrett, Lady Cresswell said, smiling at someone else. Do play us something modest. Mia crossed to the pianoforte, found a short Mozart piece unlikely to offend, and played with clean articulation and no display. When she finished, one of the Bath ladies lifted her lorgnette. Useful, she said, and how fortunate for young Master Leo to receive such discipline from someone familiar with practical limitations. Mia inclined her head. Master Leo works very hard, madam. Lady Cresswell sipped her tea. Hard work is often all that remains when birth has not arranged one's life correctly. Mia set the sheet music into order and returned to her chair. Her pulse struck once at her throat and steadied. She did not answer. Silence, properly used, was not submission. It was refusal to perform injury for an audience. At dusk, she crossed the service yard with a covered plate from her supper tray and found Mr. Fenwick, the old groundsman, crouched by the greenhouse furnace with a torn glove and soot on his cuff. He made to stand when he saw her. Do not trouble, Mr. Fenwick, she said. Sit. I have no right to your supper, miss. You have no right to this cough either, yet it has chosen you. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. She handed him the plate and waited while he wrapped both hands around the warmth. On the wall behind him, bunches of drying herbs hung from twine, brittle and fragrant. She selected 1 strip of mint and tucked it into her reticule for Leo's tea, then returned through the dark corridor before the dinner gong. By the middle of November, Leo began to look at the music rather than at his fingers. The change was visible first in fragments. He corrected his own rhythm once without prompting. He asked for the harder of 2 exercises when she offered a choice. One morning, as sleet ticked against the east windows, he reached the final bar of a Clementi sonatina and did not flinch when the note rang too bright. Again, he said, surprising them both. Again, Mia answered and reset the page. The housekeeper, Mrs. Elbridge, appeared at the end of that lesson with a folded list for kitchen stores and a message delivered in the neutral tone of someone carrying weather reports between rival states. Miss Barrett, your accounts for candle usage exceeded your allowance by 2 sticks this fortnight. I taught by dark mornings, Mrs. Elbridge. The household recognizes necessity. Mrs. Hawthorne recognizes pattern. Mia accepted the rebuke without changing expression. Please deduct the excess from my quarter wages. Mrs. Elbridge's eyes softened for half a second. I have already done so. After she left, Mia stood by the instrument with both hands on the closed lid and counted backward from 10. Her father had once told her arithmetic was merely courage in columns. She believed him now more than when she had been 16 and careless. That Sunday, after service at St. Jude's Chapel on the estate edge, Leo lingered on the stone steps while nurses collected cloaks and ladies discussed winter calls. A man sat near the gate with boots split at one seam and a veteran's posture that no shabby coat could conceal. He held his cap in his lap without extending it. Leo noticed him and looked away quickly, as children taught to fear impropriety often did. Mia touched Leo's sleeve. "Wait for me by the yew, please." She crossed to the gate, pressed a wrapped heel of bread into the man's hand and said, "There is warm broth in the kitchen if you ask for cook by name." He looked up. His eyes were pale blue, fever bright. "You are kind, miss." "Only practical," she said, because kindness discussed too long grew performative. When she rejoined Leo, he studied her face with unusual directness. "Is he a soldier?" he asked. "He was," she said. "He's a hungry man now." Leo absorbed that in silence. On the walk back, he held his gloves rather than wearing them, and once he glanced behind him toward the gate, as if revising a lesson no score could hold. The disruption arrived on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon while Mia was guiding Leo through left-hand crossings in the orangery, where frost filmed the outer panes and the scent of damp citrus leaves hung in the air. Footsteps sounded fast in the corridor beyond, then slowed at the threshold as two footmen carried in extra coal scuttles and set them down with unusual care. One addressed the other in a whisper meant to be private, and therefore perfectly audible. "From Dover before noon," they said. "No warning this time." "He never gives warning," Mia continued counting. "And 2 and 3. Leo's fingers faltered. "Who?" She kept her eyes on the score. "Your left hand must cross earlier." The footman withdrew. A quarter-hour later, Mrs. Elbridge entered, cheeks flushed from stairs and duty. "Master Leo, you are required in the blue salon at once." Leo froze on the bench. "Now?" "Now, sir. Your father has returned." The word altered the room more than the fire did. Leo slid from the bench, then stopped, looking not at Mrs. Elbridge but at Mia. "Will you come?" he asked. Protocol said no. The plea in his face said something else. Mia closed the score. "I shall bring your music folio." The blue salon had been aired in haste. The curtains still smelled of cedar from storage, and one candelabrum leaned slightly where a footman had set it too quickly. Leo stood just inside the doorway with his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of borrowed discipline. At the far window, a man in plain dark wool examined the estate map mounted on the wall, one gloved hand resting lightly on the frame as if he were orienting himself to territory he had not expected to miss. He turned when the door latch clicked. His profile struck her first. The firm mouth, the controlled stillness, the faint white line disappearing beneath his collar, where an old scar had healed without vanity. Then his eyes met hers, and recognition moved through her like cold water poured along the spine. Grey eyes, steady and unreadable. She had seen them once across a solicitor's table in London when a proposal had been delivered to her as a merger of ledgers and bloodlines. 2 years had changed the cut of his coat and the set of his shoulders, not the gaze. "Leo," he said, and his voice was low, measured, carrying command without volume. "You have grown." Leo bowed as he had been drilled. "Welcome home, sir." The man's attention shifted to Mia. Not surprise. Assessment, then something guarded behind it. "Miss Barrett." He said her name as if it required precision. "Sir," she replied. Mrs. Elbridge, hovering near the door, supplied the formal bridge. "Master Leo's instructress, Mr. Gray." Mr. Gray. The alias settled into place with the same deliberate neatness as every other concealment in the room. "I have read your reports," he said to Mia. "They are concise." "Children deserve clarity, sir." A pause. Leo looked between them, sensing geometry he could not name. Mr. Gray crossed to the pianoforte in the corner and lifted the fallboard with practiced fingers. Not a casual movement, not a man testing furniture he barely noticed. His right hand struck a soft triad, then adjusted one key by ear to account for the room's chill. "You tune by listening to the wood before the string settles," he said without looking up. "Few teachers bother." Mia kept her hands folded around Leo's folio to hide that they had tightened. Few households permit the time. He lowered the key and turned back to Leo. "Will you play for me?" Leo's breath caught. Mia felt it as surely as if the child had spoken. She stepped one pace forward and placed the folio on the stand. "Master Leo has prepared the opening etude from Czerny, sir," she said, "at moderate tempo." Mr. Gray's eyes met hers again, and this time she saw the unmistakable intelligence she remembered from London, banked now behind a merchant's plain name. What Lydia did not know, what no one in Hawthorne Court yet understood, was that the man who had returned as Mr. Gray was Adrian Vale, and Mia had once refused him when choice had been denied the room. Leo climbed onto the bench, set both feet on the velvet stool Mia kept for difficult days, and placed his fingers over the opening position, with a care that looked almost ceremonial. The blue salon had gone very quiet. Even Mrs. Elbridge, stationed by the door, seemed to hold herself still so the child could borrow steadiness from the room. "Begin when you are ready," Mia said. He struck the first line cleanly, right hand bright and left hand cautious, and reached the middle phrase before his timing loosened under his father's gaze. One wrong note sounded sharper than the rest. Leo flinched as if he had touched a hot grate and drew back from the keyboard altogether. Mia saw the old panic return to his face. The quick narrowing in his chest that always came before silence swallowed him. Adrian Vale, Mr. Gray in this house, did not rebuke him. He stood by the pianoforte with one hand resting on the carved edge, his expression unreadable. "Again, my son," he said. Nothing in the words was soft, nothing in them was unkind. Leo did not move. Mia stepped to the other side of the instrument and turned one page back, though he had not reached it. She set the metronome pendulum swinging in a slower arc than before, then tapped two fingers against the wood in the pulse she used when Leo's breath ran away from him. "One bar only," she said. "Then we decide about the next." Leo watched the pendulum. In, out, in, out. He lowered his hands and played the bar. "Good," she said, as if this had always been the assignment. "Now, the one after." He played that one as well. By the fourth bar, his shoulders had descended from his ears, and his left hand found its shape again. Mia shifted the tempo by a fraction to meet him where he truly was, not where a perfect audience might demand he be. When he reached the final chord, he looked at the keys, not at either adult, and whispered one small breath of triumph that almost failed to become sound. Adrian's mouth changed. It was only that. The strict line easing, the severity briefly lit from within. He smiled once, and the transformation altered his entire face from controlled austerity to something startlingly human. "Thank you for playing," he told Leo. Leo nodded, climbed down from the bench, and crossed to the window where the frost had etched silver fern patterns in the glass. Mrs. Elbridge took him gently by the shoulder and murmured that cook had promised sugared plums if he would come now. He went without protest, though he turned once at the door to make certain Mia remained in the room. When the latch closed, silence settled again, this time between two people who remembered each other too clearly and were pretending otherwise. Mr. Gray lowered the fallboard halfway and looked at the keyboard instead of at her. You do not correct him in the moment of fear. No, sir. Most teachers do. Most teachers are paid for obedience as much as progress. His gaze lifted then, directly to hers. Grey eyes, steady. The same eyes that had watched a solicitor present marriage terms like shipping insurance, as if a woman's life could be entered under liabilities and secured by signature. You accepted this post to avoid obedience, he said. It was not a question. It was not entirely safe. Mia kept her hands folded on Leo's folio. I accepted this post to work. A pause. He inclined his head once, a gesture that acknowledged the boundary without disputing it. His breathing breaks at the middle register, he said. I heard it. He anticipates failure there. And your remedy? Repetition without witness? She allowed herself one narrow professional addition. And a father who does not leave before he learns where the fracture begins. The words hung in the room. Mia felt heat rise beneath her collar, not from shame but from the risk she had just taken. Mr. Gray did not bristle. I have been away too long, he said. I intend to correct that. It was as close to apology as she had ever heard from him, in any name. She dipped her head. Then Master Leo will improve faster than my reports predict. He took a step back from the instrument, the light from the window catching the pale scar just above his collar before his cravat shadowed it again. Miss Barrett. Sir? You moved the tempo to his breath before he knew he needed mercy. Mia met his gaze without flinching. Children always know when they are being measured. For an instant, he looked as though he might answer with something unguarded. Instead, he put his gloves back on, each finger drawn into place with exactness, and opened the door for her to pass first. Neither acknowledged the warmth that had entered the room and left with them both. By the second week of December, his presence had become part of the estate's daily machinery, as regular as chapel bells, and no less influential. He appeared at dawn lessons without announcement and stood where he could observe Leo's hands without crowding the bench. On some mornings he said nothing at all. On others he asked one precise question that cut to the center of the exercise. Why staccato there, Miss Barrett, when the phrase asks for legato? Because he tenses if asked to sustain too soon, sir. I teach confidence first, then elegance. He accepted the answer with a single nod, as if it had been tested and passed. At noon he vanished into accounts, tenants, correspondence, and meetings that should have belonged to a far grander title than the one he claimed. Yet he returned to the schoolroom at odd hours, with details no ordinary father, and certainly no ordinary merchant, would track. The second measure in yesterday's etude was cleaner than the first, he said one afternoon, while Leo sharpened a pencil at the hearth. What changed? Mia capped the ink bottle and looked up. I altered his bench distance by 2 inches. You altered his fear by 2 inches, he said, and took the seat across from her as though such conversations were expected between them. In church on Sundays he stood in the rear pew beside Leo, rather than in the front with the county men who had already begun orbiting him. Once, as the congregation spilled onto the steps at St. Jude's, the magistrate from Norham crossed the yard, removed his hat before speaking, and lowered his voice when he saw Mia nearby. Mr. Gray, the matter from Kent is ready for your review. Mr. Gray accepted the sealed packet and said only, At Hawthorne Court, tomorrow. The magistrate bowed again, more deeply than form required, then turned and nearly collided with Lady Cresswell, who stared after him with sharp interest. Mia adjusted Leo's muffler and pretended not to notice either man. The packet bore a crest she recognized from old legal stationery in her father's study, though she could not at first place why the memory troubled her. That same afternoon she found Mr. Fenwick near the glass house, rubbing stiffness from his hands. She brought him tea steeped with the mint she had dried above her own hearth, and wrapped his torn glove cuff with spare wool tape. From the gravel path beyond the yews, she felt a gaze pause on them. When she looked up, Mr. Grey stood half in shadow, hat in hand. Watching with that same controlled attention, he gave contracts and cadence. He did not interrupt. He only inclined his head once, almost imperceptibly, before walking on toward the west orchard, where two stewards waited with ledgers. 3 days passed before Lydia's next letter arrived, and it arrived with an enclosed account from Mr. Cobb, listing arrears Mia had never authorized. She read it at her narrow desk, while sleet hit the eaves in dry bursts. Payment is overdue. Obedience remains expected. Lord Penhurst inquires whether your temperament has improved. Her fingers tightened on the page until the paper creased. She wrote her reply in the same even hand she used for scale assignments. The remittance due under compulsion has been sent. No additional sums are acknowledged. Do not discuss my temperament with strangers. She sealed the letter and carried it herself to the dispatch tray in the steward's office. When she turned to leave, she found Mr. Grey at the doorway, having entered so quietly she had not heard him. "You should not walk these corridors without a lamp after dusk," he said. "Then the household should allot me more candles." His eyes flicked once to the outgoing tray, to Lydia's distinctive cream paper, then back to Mia's face. "Mrs. Barrett writes often. She invoices often." He stepped aside so she could pass. "If those letters create legal pressure, inform me." She stopped at the threshold, but did not turn fully toward him. "Why would that concern you, sir?" He answered without hesitation. "Because pressure is easiest to apply in silence." The words landed with more weight than his calm tone suggested. Mia felt, with a clarity she did not welcome, that he was speaking from practiced knowledge. In the orangery, where winter light came green through citrus leaves and fogged glass, Leo sometimes practiced without the instrument, tapping patterns on the long oak table, while Mia counted and corrected finger substitutions. One morning, Mr. Grey entered, carrying no papers, only a cup of coffee gone nearly cold. He set it down, removed his gloves, and listened through an entire run of silent drills. Leo missed a crossing and looked to Mia for correction. She opened her mouth, but Mr. Grey spoke first. "Your fourth finger is late," he told the boy. "Not weak, late." Leo tried again. Better. Mr. Grey moved beside the table and demonstrated the pattern on the wood with surprising economy, each finger falling in exact sequence. The motion was practiced, not theatrical. Mia watched the tendons in his hand, the old white scar near his wrist, and the minute pause before the final turn, as if his body carried an old injury and had trained around it. "You played seriously," she said before she could decide whether to ask. He withdrew his hand. "A long time ago." "Where?" He picked up his coffee again, glanced toward Leo to ensure the child was watching his own fingers, and said, "Where men needed discipline more than applause." It could have meant a boarding school. It could have meant a regiment. It could have meant both. Mia returned to counting as if the answer satisfied her completely. Later that week, in the study assigned to estate business, he asked to review Leo's progression charts. She brought them at 7 in the evening, expecting signatures and dismissal. Instead, she found the desk laid with tenant maps, shipping insurance tables, and a stack of correspondence stamped from London chambers that advised ministers and peers, not provincial traders. A signet lay near the blotter, turned face down as if hidden by habit. He looked up when she entered. "Miss Barrett, sit, if you please." She remained standing for one heartbeat longer than politeness required, then took the chair opposite him and placed the charts between them. He read in silence, following her annotations with a concentration that made most men look careless by comparison. When he reached the page where she had marked Leo's recital panic in red ink, his expression did not change, but his finger rested briefly on the line where she had written, "Remove audience pressure. Preserve confidence at all costs." "You waived your completion bonus," he said. "Yes, sir." "You were not obliged." "I was responsible." He closed the file. "That distinction is rare." Mia met his gaze. "It should not be." A faint sound came from the corridor, male voices, then the steward announcing someone from Norham. Mr. Gray did not raise his voice, yet authority entered the room like an opened door. "Send him in after 5 minutes." "Yes, sir." Not Mr. Gray. Not in the way staff answered him when no one was supposed to notice. He turned back to her, and for the first time since his return, the formal mask thinned enough for frankness to show through. "Leo trusts you," he said. "He did not trust anyone before." Mia touched the edge of the chart, aligning it with the desk grain. "He trusts routine. He trusts you inside the routine." She could not deny it. She also could not afford to stand in the center of that truth. "Master Leo's progress is measurable," she said, reverting to the language of contracts. "If you continue attendance at morning sessions, his stability will increase." Something like dry amusement moved at the corner of his mouth. "You are dismissing me, Miss Barrett." "I am concluding the report." He almost smiled again, then let it fade. "Very well." At the door she paused because she had carried one practical question up 3 flights of stairs, and she would not carry it back unanswered. "The magistrate removes his hat when he addresses you," she said without turning. "Men with county power do not do that for merchants." Behind her, papers shifted softly as he set them aside. "No," he said, "they do not." She waited. He offered nothing further. Mia inclined her head to no one and stepped into the corridor, where the house had already begun to ring for supper. She did not pursue the inconsistency. Survival still required restraint, and restraint, she had learned, was sometimes the strongest form of movement available to a woman without declared power. Yet, as she descended toward the schoolroom, Leo's scales drifting faintly up from the east wing, she knew with growing certainty that Hawthorne Court was built on names arranged like screens, and one of them would eventually have to fall. She turned toward the schoolroom door and found Leo already at the keyboard, working through the left-hand pattern she had assigned as if the act of repetition could keep the rest of the house from changing shape around him. Supper trays waited untouched on the side table. He did not look up when she entered. He only played the same 4 bars again, each attempt a little cleaner than the one before, while the gong's final resonance faded into the corridor. Mia set her gloves down, crossed to the instrument, and listened through one complete cycle before speaking. "You are anticipating the turn by half a beat." Leo stopped, frowned at the keys, and tried once more with visible effort. This time he landed the crossing and released a breath through his nose, controlled and thin. "There," she said. "That is where your hand belongs." He glanced toward the doorway. "He did not come tonight. Your father is in conference." "He always says conference when people argue." The plainness of it caught her. She closed the score and sat beside him on the bench, not touching him, only sharing the narrow space. "Then tonight we work without witness, and tomorrow you may astonish him." Leo considered the word astonish as if it were an advanced chord. At length he nodded. "Tomorrow at dawn." Tomorrow at dawn. By the end of January, Hawthorne Court had entered the season of managed display, when every room was polished for visitors and every child in the house was expected to prove the family had invested correctly. Mrs. Elbridge brought the news in a folded notice card and set it beside Mia's tea with apologetic precision. Winter Musicale, first Thursday in February. Small audience, they say. County families only. Mia read the card once. Master Leo Hawthorne would perform one selected etude and one duet line with accompaniment. Assessment to be entered into his education file. Completion bonus dispersed upon successful public execution according to household standard. Who selected the repertoire? She asked. Mr. Gray approved the list, miss. Of course he had. The chosen etude was not cruelly difficult, yet it demanded exactly what frightened Leo most. Beginning under observation, recovering from error without freezing, and ending without rushing. Mia folded the card, placed it in her ledger, and adjusted the week's schedule by candlelight until the margins filled with small corrections. Dawn drills in the East Music Room grew longer. She moved him from stool to bench and back again, to break the association between one seat and one fear. She made him begin pieces from the middle, then the end, then a random measure, so panic could not claim the first bar as sovereign ground. She opened the door while he played, then closed it, then left it half ajar, teaching his body that sound could travel into corridors and still remain his own. When his breathing shortened, she tapped the rhythm on the wood and made him match pulse to pendulum. When he made a mistake and looked at her with dread in his eyes, she gave him the same instruction every time. Again, Master Leo. On the third morning of that regimen, Mr. Gray took his usual place near the window and listened without comment until Leo reached the final phrase and stopped cleanly on the beat. The child sat very still, waiting for judgment. Mr. Gray spoke to Mia, not to the boy. He is ready for half a room. Not yet for a full one, she said. He cannot choose his audience forever. Nor should he be broken by it at 9. Silence gathered. Leo looked from one adult to the other. Mr. Gray's expression remained contained, but he shifted his attention to his son and said, Your instructress is correct about pace. You will do this properly. Leo gave one brief nod and slid from the bench for copywork. Mr. Gray stepped nearer to Mia and lowered his voice. If he fails in public, they will remember the failure longer than the work. That is why I am training recovery, sir. He studied her face with that exact, unsettling focus she had come to recognize as his truest habit. And if recovery does not come quickly enough, Mia closed the score, then I will stand beside him and carry what I can. His eyes held hers a moment longer than protocol invited. I believe you. 2 days before the musicale, Lydia Barrett arrived at Hawthorne Court in a carriage bright with lacquer and contempt. Mia saw the crest from the upper corridor window and felt her stomach draw tight before she felt anything else. Lydia emerged in plum velvet, diamonds cold against her throat even in afternoon light, and accepted the footman's hand as if the gravel itself owed her deference. She did not request Mia's presence immediately. That would have implied urgency. Instead, she allowed an hour to pass, enough for servants to report her observations through the house, before sending a maid with a message delivered in neutral tones. Mrs. Barrett requests Miss Barrett in the west drawing room. Mia entered to find Lydia seated near the fire with Lady Cresswell and 2 guests from Norham. Tea had been poured. A plate of sugared almonds sat untouched between them. Lydia looked up, and her smile held no warmth at all. Miss Barrett, she said, how diligently employed you appear. Mia inclined her head. Mrs. Barrett. Lady Cresswell fluttered her fan. We speak of tomorrow's entertainment. Your pupil is to perform, I hear. He is prepared, Mia said. Lydia stirred her tea once, the spoon barely touching porcelain. Prepared is an elastic term. Still, one must applaud effort in all classes. No one objected. No one ever objected to cruelty delivered as social observation. Mia stood with her hands loosely clasped and kept her face composed while heat moved up the back of her neck. Lydia set down her cup. Do remember, Mia, that visible failure reflects on instruction. One can hide incompetence in a ledger, not before an audience. Mia met her gaze and gave her 4 words. I understand my duty. Lydia's eyes sharpened at the restraint, as if denied a performance she had purchased. Do you? Excellent. Mia left before she could be dismissed, crossed the corridor, and walked directly to the schoolroom where Leo sat at the table, drawing treble clefs in careful rows. She set a glass of water by his elbow and adjusted his pencil grip without comment. Her hand trembled once when she withdrew it. He noticed anyway. Will there be many people? He asked. Enough to practice courage, she said. He looked at the water, then at her. I can play if you count. I will count. The night before the performance, she sat up past midnight, altering the fingering in Leo's copy, so the troublesome crossing fell under stronger fingers. It was not orthodox. It was effective. Candle stubs guttered beside her ink, and by the time she sealed the revised sheet, the coal in her scuttle had collapsed to grey. She slept in her chair for perhaps an hour, then rose before dawn, washed in cold water, and went downstairs with the score tucked inside her sleeve. The musicale began at 4 in the long salon, where chairs had been set in 3 neat arcs and extra lamps made the mirrors throw light too brightly across the room. County families arrived in silk and winter wool, trailing controlled curiosity. Leo waited in the side antechamber with Mia and the nurse, pale but upright, fingers opening and closing around nothing. You begin with the first line only, Mia reminded him. Then the second line. We do not play the whole room at once. He whispered the bars under his breath as if reciting a prayer. Through the half-open door she could hear voices arranging hierarchy in murmurs. Lady Cresswell welcoming, a magistrate laughing softly. Lydia's flatter cadence among them, unmistakable. And Mr. Gray, somewhere beyond sight, speaking little and being obeyed without visible effort. When Leo's name was announced, he walked to the instrument with admirable posture and sat exactly where she had taught him to sit. Mia took her place at the side, ostensibly to turn pages. She gave him the smallest nod she could manage. He played the first phrase cleanly. The second phrase wavered, recovered, and held. Then, from the second row, Lydia leaned toward Lady Cresswell and said in a voice pitched to carry just far enough, "Poor child. Defective stock should never be displayed so publicly." The words struck Leo like a physical interruption. His hands stopped. The room fell abruptly silent except for the faint hiss of lamp oil. Leo's face emptied, then closed. Mia saw the panic seize his breathing, shallow and fast, the old fracture opening under too many eyes. She moved before anyone else did, stepped forward into the silence, and laid her hand lightly on the closed edge of the score. "The error is mine," she said to the room, clear and formal. "I advanced Master Leo to public performance prematurely. I request your pardon." A murmur ran through the chairs, relief mixed with appetite. She did not look at Lydia. She did not look at Mr. Gray. She bent to Leo and spoke low enough for him alone. "Stand with me." He stood, rigid. She addressed him as if they were in the schoolroom at dawn. "We walk out. We begin again tomorrow." They crossed the salon together, her pace even, his hand not in hers but close enough that their sleeves brushed. Behind them, Conversation resumed in carefully softened tones that failed to conceal satisfaction. In the antechamber, Leo pressed both palms to his eyes and held himself still with visible effort. "I could not hear the count," he said. "I know." I stopped. "You stopped," she agreed. "And then you stood. That is also work." He lowered his hands. "Will he send me away?" The question was not childish. It was administrative. She knelt to his height and kept her voice level. "Not while I hold this post." At that moment, she believed it. An hour later, after the last guests had gone and lamps were being trimmed down, Mrs. Elbridge delivered a sealed memorandum from the steward's office. Performance standard unmet. Completion bonus for winter term forfeited under Clause 9. Instructional review pending. Mia read it in the passage outside the music room, folded it, and tucked it into her pocket. The sum represented 3 months of her private savings. Half would have gone to Lydia by coercion. Half would have bought her margin against dismissal. It was gone now. She found Mr. Gray in the study near midnight, standing over tenant maps with his coat unbuttoned and fatigue visible at the edges of his composure. He looked up as she entered, took in her face, and set his pen down at once. "Miss Barrett, I received the steward's notice regarding the forfeiture." She placed the folded paper on his desk. "I do not contest it." His jaw tightened. "Clause 9 permits discretion. Not in a room full of witnesses." He came around the desk, stopping at formal distance. "My son was injured by malice, not by your instruction. Contracts do not distinguish motive, sir." For a moment he looked less like the contained figure Hawthorne Court obeyed, and more like the man she had once faced across legal terms she had not accepted. "If you require funds in advance, no." The word came out sharper than she intended. She steadied it. "No, thank you. I came to make one amendment." He waited. "I will continue Master Leo's instruction through winter without wages, until he can perform in public without harm. Enter it as my request." His expression did not move, but she saw the impact in the stillness of his hands. "That is not acceptable. It is necessary. It will leave you exposed." "I am already exposed, sir. The difference is whether he is abandoned with me." Silence expanded between them, carrying every unsaid thing. At last he said very quietly, "You owe this house nothing." "I owe the boy continuity." He held her gaze. "And you believe continuity must be bought with your own security." "I believe it must be paid by someone." She turned to go. Behind her, his voice followed, lower than before. "Miss Barrett," she paused, "I will not forget this." She inclined her head without turning and left the study. 3 nights later, with the house finally settled and the corridor lamps burned low, Mia carried Leo's revised exercises to the library because she had promised to leave them on the side table before morning conferences began. The library door stood nearly closed, firelight cutting a narrow line across the passage runner. She reached for the latch, then stopped when she heard Lydia's voice inside, cool as polished stone. "She is useful because she is compliant. Keep her through spring, and I will finalize Penhurst." Mia went perfectly still, one hand on the packet of exercises, the paper edge biting her palm. Mr. Gray answered after a pause she could not measure. His tone was guarded, unreadable. "Do what secures Leo." The words entered her body like a struck key in the ribs, sharp and resonant, leaving no visible mark and no room for misinterpretation in that instant. She stood in the corridor while heat drained from her fingers. The exercise pages slipped slightly. She tightened her grip before they could fall. Inside the library, chairs shifted, glass touched wood. Negotiation continued in low, efficient voices. Mia stepped back without sound, turned and walked the length of the corridor with her spine straight and her pulse beating hard enough to make her fingertips tremble. At the schoolroom door she paused, pressed her free hand once against the panel to steady it, then entered and set Leo's exercises in a neat stack by the metronome, as if nothing in the house had altered at all. Mia stepped into the schoolroom, set Leo's exercises in a precise stack beside the metronome, and stood with both palms against the desk until the tremor in her fingers passed. The fire had burned low. Wax had pooled at the base of the candle and hardened in pale ridges. On the slate board, the day's assignment remained in her own hand. Breath before bar 3. She looked at those words and understood, with a clarity that left no room for argument, that she could not teach a child steadiness by living as a bargain between other people. She crossed the corridor to her room under the eaves and lit no second candle. Moonlight through the sloped window gave enough to work by. The carpet bag came down from the peg with a soft thud against the bed frame. She packed as she had packed the first time. 2 wool dresses, the black silk, mending roll, tuning fork, metronome wrapped in linen, the stitched music books with Leo's corrected fingering notes, and the contract she had signed in London with a hand that had not yet learned how expensive dependence could be. Then she opened the writing desk and added every letter Lydia had sent that contained a demand for wages, marriage, or obedience. Mr. Cobb's arrears account went in beside them. At the bottom, she placed a copy of the remittance receipts, Mrs. Elbridge had initialed each month because arithmetic was still courage in columns. By the time the chapel clock struck 3, she had written 2 notes. The first went to Mrs. Elbridge. Master Leo's scales for mourning remain posted. Please tell him I did not leave without respect. I left to prevent further harm. The second was shorter, addressed to Mr. Gray. I withdraw from all private negotiation regarding my person, wages, and marriage. Any further communication from Mrs. Barrett will receive legal answer only. She sanded both pages, sealed them with plain wax, and sat once on the edge of the narrow bed to pull on her boots. The leather was stiff with old polish. Her hands were steady now. In the service passage, she found Thomas, the under-footman who carried ash buckets before dawn, and gave him the sealed notes with enough coin for his discretion and none for his silence. One for Mrs. Elbridge at first light, she said. One for Mr. Gray directly. He stared at the carpet bag, then at her face. Are you returning for breakfast, miss? No. He nodded once as if she had answered a question larger than he had asked. The east door was bolted but not barred. Cold struck her the moment she stepped into the yard, sharp enough to sting the inside of her nose. She did not wake the coachman. She took the north lane on foot until she reached the turnpike, then hired a market cart bound for town, from a farmer who recognized neither her name nor her urgency. Dawn found her wrapped in borrowed sacking between crates of apples, watching hedgerows pass in silver light, while her bag rested against her knees, like a verdict already entered. Barrett House looked unchanged when she reached it, as if the building had never noticed her absence. The brass knocker shone. The front steps had been swept before sunrise. A maid opened the door, began to say Miss Barrett in surprise, then remembered protocol and curtsied too late. Mrs. Barrett is in conference, the maid said. I know, Mia replied, and handed over her gloves without waiting to be announced. The corridor smelled of coal, beeswax, and Lydia's amber perfume. Voices carried from the morning room at the back. Lydia's flat cadence, Mr. Cobb's papery murmur, and the smoother legal diction of Mr. Hales, the family solicitor who had drafted her father's posthumous settlements. Mia walked in without knocking. 3 heads turned. Lydia did not rise. "Well," Lydia said, setting down her teacup. "The employee returns." Mr. Cobb half stood, then sat again when Mia took the empty chair at the end of the table and placed her carpetbag upright beside her knees. "This meeting concerns trust administration," Mr. Hales began, affronted by her entry more than curious about it. "You were not requested, Miss Barrett." Mia drew the Hawthorne contract from her bag and laid it on the polished wood between the jam dish and the solicitor's inkstand. "I withdraw my consent." Lydia's expression did not alter, but one diamond earring swung as she turned her head. "Consent to what, precisely?" "To collection of my wages, to negotiation of my marriage, to any representation that I am under your domestic direction." Mr. Cobb gave a dry laugh he tried to disguise as a cough. "You have no independent standing to make such declarations." Mia took out the bundle of Lydia's letters, untied the ribbon, and spread 3 pages where all could read the repeated lines. "Payment is due. Obedience is expected. Lord Penhurst remains willing." Then she placed the arrears account beside them. "These are not maternal advisories," she said. "These are coercive demands tied to money extracted under threat." Lydia glanced at the pages as if they were laundry lists. "You accepted assistance after your father died. Debts follow assistance." "My father's will created a trust, not a debt." Mr. Hales's eyes flicked up at that, quick and guarded. "The trust remains under temporary supervision until proper marriage secures continuity." "According to which clause?" Mia asked. He hesitated for 1 beat too long. Lydia answered for him. "According to reality, Mia. You are 24, employed in a child's schoolroom, and attached to no household of rank. Lord Penhurst offers restoration. You will not refuse me in my own house over theatrical notions of legal autonomy." Mia looked at her stepmother and felt the old fear rise, then settle into something harder and cleaner. "I am refusing you now." The solicitor tried to reassert procedure. "Miss Barrett, if you persist, Mrs. Barrett may petition for reputational review and request your dismissal from Hawthorne Court under concerns of instability." Mia folded her hands on the table. "Then petition. I will answer in magistrate's court today." Lydia gave a small smile, the one she used when she believed outcomes had already been purchased. "You do not have counsel." A knock sounded at the door before Mia could respond. The maid entered, pale and breathless. "Mrs. Barrett, a note from Norham. The magistrate has advanced your hearing to noon. At the request of Mr. Adrian—" She stopped, reading the final line, uncertain whether she had spoken too much. "At the request of a party already entered on the matter." Lydia extended her hand for the note. Mia did not move, but she felt her pulse change. Not surprise. Recognition finally given a name. By noon, the county courtroom was full of winter coats, damp boots, and the restrained curiosity of people who preferred scandal when filed in proper order. Mia stood at the petitioner's rail with her carpetbag at her feet and her evidence tied in neat packets on the clerk's table. Lydia's letters, remittance receipts, Cobb's arrears sheet, and a certified copy of the Hawthorne contract showing wages assigned under pressure. Mr. Hales represented Mrs. Barrett. Mr. Cobb sat behind him, smug until the clerk called for all parties, and no counsel appeared at Mia's side. The magistrate adjusted his spectacles. "Miss Barrett, do you intend to proceed unrepresented?" "I intend to proceed," she said. The rear door opened. Conversation in the gallery dropped to silence without command. Mia turned with the others and saw him cross the aisle in formal black, not the plain wool of Hawthorne Court. The cut of the coat was severe and unmistakably aristocratic. At his hand was a signet she had seen face down on the study blotter, now worn openly. He stopped beside her at the rail, gave a brief bow to the bench, and spoke in the same measured voice she had heard in the blue salon, stripped now of concealment. "I am Adrian Vale, Duke of Norfield, and executor of the late Jonathan Barrett's will." The sentence moved through the room like a change in pressure. Mia did not look at the gallery. She looked at him, at the profile she had recognized before reason, and understood every inconsistency that had shadowed Hawthorne Court. Magistrates removing hats, stewards obeying unspoken instruction, London packets marked with ministerial seals, a man called Mr. Grey who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. Mr. Hales recovered first. "Your Grace, this is highly irregular." Adrian set a leather ledger case on the table and opened it with gloved precision. "Irregularity is precisely why I am here." He passed one document to the clerk, one to the magistrate, and one to Mia without performance. Codicil 17 names Miss Barrett sole beneficiary at 25, with interim income protected from guardianship claims, except for documented educational expenses. Mrs. Barrett withdrew principal and income for personal account over 4 years. Mr. Cobb certified those withdrawals. Mr. Cobb's face lost colour. "I acted under instruction." "You acted without authority," Adrian said. Lydia rose half from her seat. "This is retaliatory theatre. He has concealed his identity in my associate's household, and now presumes to lecture me on propriety." Adrian did not raise his tone. "I concealed my identity at Hawthorne Court to assess my son's instruction and household management. I did not conceal probate records. You did." The magistrate read in silence for a long minute, then another. Pages turned. Seals were checked against the registry sample. The clerk compared signatures with the county file and nodded once, sharply. Mia stood very still while the world she had lived inside rearranged itself by ink and law. She thought of the library door, Lydia's arithmetic, Adrian's answer that had struck like betrayal. "Do what secures Leo." She heard it again now, and heard beneath the wound, the boundary he had been trying to hold, while evidence was assembled for a court that required documents, not sentiment. The hurt did not vanish. It changed shape. The magistrate looked up at last. "Mrs. Barrett, pending full accounting, this court orders immediate seizure of accounts linked to the Barrett Interim Trust. Mr. Cobb is suspended from fiduciary function and referred for fraud inquiry. Miss Barrett is released from all personal and financial directives previously asserted by Mrs. Barrett, effective now." No one gasped. County rooms did not gasp. They absorbed and recalculated. Lydia gathered her gloves with deliberate calm. "You are making a very public error." The magistrate's expression remained neutral. "The records are public, madam. The error was private and prolonged." She turned to Mia then, eyes cool and bright as cut stone. "You mistake temporary vindication for security." Mia met her gaze and answered in 4 words. "I prefer lawful terms." Lydia left without another word. Mr. Hales followed, already writing notes to salvage what could be salvaged. Mr. Cobb remained seated until the bailiff touched his sleeve and indicated the side chamber where statements were taken. When the room thinned, Adrian closed the ledger case and turned toward Mia, formal distance still between them, despite everything now known. "I should have told you sooner," he said. Mia held the copy of the codicil in her gloved hands. The paper smelled faintly of dust and sealing wax. "You should have told me before the library." "Yes." He did not defend himself. He did not ask immediate forgiveness. In that restraint she recognized the same man who had watched her move Leo through terror 1 bar at a time. Exact, imperfect, unwilling to pretend that motives erased harm. The clerk approached with a final sheet for her signature acknowledging restored authority over her trust and person. Mia signed, blotted, and returned the pen. The line of her name sat steady across the page. Outside, the afternoon light lay pale on the courthouse steps. Hawthorne Court waited miles away. So did Leo's scales at dawn. Mia tucked the codicil into her carpetbag beside the metronome and stepped forward into the cold with her own documents in her own keeping. The gravel shifted under Mia's boots as she descended the courthouse steps, and she was still adjusting to the unfamiliar weight of documents that belonged to her alone, when Adrian moved to walk beside her rather than ahead. He did not reach for her carpetbag. He did not try to steer her toward the waiting carriage with a hand at her elbow. He matched her pace and kept formal distance, as if authority had already done enough taking for one day. "Mrs. Elbridge sent a groom to the court," he said. "Leo has not begun his afternoon work. He is waiting." Mia tightened her hand around the bag handle. "Did he receive my note?" "Yes. Thomas delivered it at first light." Adrian glanced at her, then back to the street. "Mrs. Elbridge gave him yours before breakfast. She read mine only after." A small knot in Mia's chest loosened, not from comfort but from sequence restored. The messages had arrived in the order she intended. Nothing had been intercepted. Nothing revised. They reached the carriage. The Norfield crest was no longer hidden on the door. She saw it clearly now, the same device stamped on the Kent packet at St. Jude's, the same impression she had seen face down on his study blotter, and not pursued because survival had required restraint. Adrian opened the carriage door. "Will you return to Hawthorne Court?" "I will return to Leo," she said. "The rest can be discussed indoors." He inclined his head. "As you wish." The road back felt shorter than her flight to town had felt at dawn, though every rut in the winter earth still rose through the wheels. Mia sat opposite Adrian with her bag at her feet and the codicil copy in her reticule, reading one clause twice, then a third time, until the legal language stopped looking like a rumour. Sole beneficiary at 25. Interim income protected. No marriage contingency. Her father had written provision, and Lydia had written over it in practice until a court put ink back in its proper place. Adrian spoke only once before the gates of Hawthorne Court came into view. "Mr. Cobb submitted a preliminary statement in chambers after you left." Mia looked up. "Voluntary?" "Under instruction." "From whom?" "The magistrate," he said. "Not me." The distinction mattered. She nodded once. Leo was in the East music room when she entered, still in his day coat, though the room was warm, standing beside the bench with both hands flat on the closed keyboard as if guarding it. Mrs. Elbridge stood by the fire with mending in her lap and eyes that had gone red at the edges without shedding tears. At the sound of the latch, Leo turned so quickly his stool tipped. "You came back," he said. Mia set down the carpetbag just inside the door. "I said I would." He crossed the room in 3 quick steps and stopped inches from her, uncertain of protocol now that adults had broken so many of their own rules. Mia solved it by lifting his fallen stool and setting it upright, practical first, then meeting his gaze. "We have work to do," she said. His throat moved. "Am I dismissed?" "No." "Are you dismissed?" "Also no." Mrs. Elbridge exhaled softly, as though she had been holding that breath since dawn. "Master Leo refused luncheon," she said. "He stated Miss Barrett counts better than any clock in this house." Leo reddened, but did not deny it. Mia removed her gloves and laid them on the piano lid. "Then we begin with scales before supper, and you may prove your claim." He climbed to the bench at once. She set the metronome, listened through one uncertain run, then another, and by the third his breathing had settled into the pendulum's exact arc. At the doorway, Adrian stood in silence, hat in hand. She did not acknowledge him until Leo finished the line and looked up. "Again, tomorrow?" Leo asked. "Tomorrow at dawn," she said. Only then did she turn to Adrian. "Now, we discuss the rest." They met in the study with Mrs. Elbridge present at Mia's request, and the Norfield solicitor, Mr. Ames, newly arrived from town with 2 dispatch cases and no appetite for social theatre. The fire snapped low. Ink smelled metallic in the warm room. Mia placed each physical document on the desk in orderly sequence. Lydia's demand letters, Mr. Cobb's arrears sheet, remittance receipts, her Hawthorne contract, and the court order copied and sealed that afternoon. "I want the originals of my correspondence returned after certification," she said. "Certified copies may remain with the court file." Mr. Ames nodded, already annotating. "Done. My contract at Hawthorne Court requires amendment for unpaid winter instruction." Adrian answered before the solicitor did. "Payment will be made in full, including the forfeited completion bonus." Mia held his gaze. "No discretionary gift." "No gift," he said. "Accrued wages under corrected terms." She touched the codicil through her reticule fabric, grounding herself in texture and fact. "And no further remittances to Mrs. Barrett or her agents?" Mr. Ames slid a fresh page toward her. "I have drafted notice already. Service to Barrett House by morning. Any contact must proceed through counsel." Mrs. Elbridge set down her mending and spoke for the first time. "Miss Barrett, if I may." Thomas feared he had erred by taking coin for delivery. He did not. I told him so. Mia looked at the housekeeper, remembering every small softness that had never found language. "Thank you." Mrs. Elbridge gave one brief, loaded glance toward Adrian, then resolved it herself. "I knew Mr. Gray was not Mr. Gray the day the Norham magistrate bowed in the mud, but it was not my place to name what my employer concealed. It is my place to say this. Master Leo has not slept through the night since the musicale until today, when he heard your steps in the corridor." Thread by thread, the room settled. By the first week of April, crocus blades had cut through the frost by the south wall, and the long salon at Hawthorne Court had been rearranged for the spring musicale with chairs set in wider arcs than before, and no second row reserved for Lydia Barrett's opinions. A new placard stood at the entrance in black lettering on creamboard. Hawthorne Court Music School, Director Miss Mia Barrett. Lessons for estate children and village pupils, by petition and scholarship. Mia stood beside the pianoforte in plain blue silk she had paid for herself. No borrowed jewels at her throat, the metronome on the side table like a compact old ally. Mr. Fenwick waited near the rear doors in a clean coat, cough eased, his glove cuffs neatly bound where she had once wrapped wool tape. Near him stood the veteran from St. Jude's Gate, now employed as evening porter. He held his cap under his arm and watched the room with disciplined calm. Lady Cresswell entered with practiced brightness and paused at the placard long enough for everyone to notice she had read it. She approached Mia with a smile polished for witnesses. "Miss Barrett, Director, how very enterprising." Mia inclined her head. "Lady Cresswell." A beat passed. Lady Cresswell lowered her voice. "I owe you a correction. I mistook your circumstances for your capacity." Mia considered her, then answered without cruelty. "Many people did." Leo opened the program with the same churny etude that had broken in winter. His hands trembled on the first measure and steadied by the third. Mia counted under her breath where only he could hear. One pulse, then the next. And when he reached the middle register, he did not freeze. He adjusted, recovered, and completed the final chord with clean release. The room held silence for a half-second, then applause rose. Not indulgent this time, but honest. Leo looked at Mia, eyes bright with astonishment at his own body's obedience. She gave him a small nod. You did the work. After the last student bowed and the guests began to drift toward supper, Adrian crossed the salon floor toward her without title, without escort, without any paper between them. Evening light from the tall windows caught the scar at his collar and the Norfield signet on his hand, both visible now, neither disguised. "Miss Barrett," he said. She waited. "The first proposal made in my name was an instrument," he said, voice low and even. "I permitted that. I was wrong." She did not rescue him from the sentence. He continued, "I am asking again with no condition attached to property, income, or position. Will you consider marrying me because you choose me, and only for that reason?" Mia looked past him once, to the keyboard where Leo was showing Mrs. Elbridge his corrected fingering with grave pride, then back to Adrian. She could hear the metronome still ticking on the side table, marking time that belonged to no one's command now. "Yes," she said, "I will consider it, and I choose the terms." A rare smile changed his face, not to triumph, but to relief. "Name them." "Truth first," she said. "Always. Leo's lessons remain mine to direct. The school remains open to children without title, and no one speaks for me in legal or social rooms unless I request it." He held her gaze, agreed. She gave him her hand then, not as surrender but as contract spoken in the open and witnessed by no coercive audience at all. Behind them, the salon that had once measured her for failure now filled with students collecting music sheets under her instruction, and Mia stood at the center of it, belonging completely.